Then at 4:30 I'd be off the air, and I had to drive 55 miles to Eugene, and then I had to preach that night. Now that was the way I carried on the schedule, and I had to get out the plain truth and pray for the sick and have counseling and everything else all through the rest of the week. Now, in the meantime, a radio station opened up in Spokane and in Salem, Oregon, and we had a network arranged, our own network, and I called it the Liberty Network. But it was over telegraph lines of the Postal Telegraph Company. I reached a 50,000 watt station over in Spokane, and also a local station at Salem, Oregon, and Portland, as well as Eugene, for some time on that network. Now, the work was going so fast that I told the brethren of the Sardis Church in Jefferson that I could only preach about half the time. So one of their men, Roy Daly, took it every other Sabbath, and then every other Sabbath I continued on, and this continued for some years. In April 1942, I was able to get on a station in Southern California, in Hollywood. KMTR, it was then called, a very good station. I started on that, and then they opened up a time that I could preach every evening at 5 o'clock. And for the first time, we went on to radio daily, with daily programs. Well, that had an immediate response, and the work now was beginning to grow. And now at that time, I had to drop preaching up at Jefferson to the Sardis people altogether. And that did not happen until in 1942. So all of this time, from 1933, when the Philadelphia era began, I was still working with them. You see, it was a gradual transition from the Sardis era down to the present Philadelphia era. Now, the Philadelphia era was complete and was separated completely now from the Sardis era. To tell you the truth, I don't know what has happened to those people from that time on. I lost track of them. They split, they resplit, and resplit. Now, that transition then had finally become complete, and the Philadelphia era finally was established. I've said this, I want you to know that I did not just leave the Sardis people to start some work of my own. This has been continuously God's church. But the Sardis people never would accept the message of the gospel of the kingdom. They never would accept God's holy days. They never would accept any new truth. But the Philadelphia era has brought much new truth into God's work, and it has grown and developed into one church worldwide.
Soon after Mr. Armstrong began broadcasting daily, the opportunity came to purchase time on the giant 50,000-watt station WHO in Des Moines, Iowa. And a few months later, another superstation, WOAI, in San Antonio, Texas. Then in August 1944, Mr. Armstrong was able to purchase time on even more powerful stations in Mexico. The World Tomorrow program could now be heard nationwide, and mail was received from every state of the Union. As a result, the Plain Truth circulation soon increased to 75,000 copies a month. Mr. Armstrong realized that the work had outgrown the office facilities at Eugene. The peaceful Oregon town had been a good place to begin, but if the message was to reach the world, Mr. Armstrong needed to be closer to Hollywood, the media capital of America. He also began to realize the need to train others to help in the fast-growing work. And so, 12 years after the work began in the Willamette Valley, the headquarters was moved to Pasadena in Southern California. In 1947, Ambassador College opened with just 4 students, but the college enrollment grew. The first class graduated in 1951, the first of many hundreds of young people who would be trained to help in the work. In 1953, the most powerful radio station on Earth, Radio Luxembourg, began to broadcast The World Tomorrow to the British Isles and the continent of Europe. And so growth continued around the world, first on radio and then on television. Today, the program is heard around the world. The programs are also subtitled in the French language for viewers in France and Belgium. An Italian subtitled program is being prepared and will be seen in Italy. The circulation of the plain truth has kept pace with the growth of the TV and radio program. The first issue was hand-produced by Mr. and Mrs. Armstrong using an old Neo-style machine. About 250 copies were duplicated. Now, as the plain truth approaches its 50th year, over 6 million copies are printed each month. It is published in 6 languages: English, German, French, Spanish, Dutch, Italian, and plans are now being completed for a Norwegian edition to begin in 1984. Thousands of magazines are distributed each month through lighted displays at major train stations and airports, through the Elson's gift stores at major hotels, and in supermarkets across the nation. In response to the first broadcast, 14 letters were received. On August 17, 1983, the mail receiving department in Pasadena received the 50 millionth letter asking for literature. The work has come a long way from the days when Mr. and Mrs. Armstrong worked together in a cramped 2-room office in Eugene. They lacked proper resources. The files, records, accounts, and subscription lists were kept in cardboard boxes. There was no money to buy filing cabinets. But it was God's work, and like a mustard seed, it grew. Today, each of those boxes has become a major department, employing dozens of people. The department heads report regularly to Mr. Armstrong, informing him of progress and getting his direction for future growth in their areas of responsibility. In the boardroom in the administration building in Pasadena, Mr. Armstrong also meets regularly with the Council of Elders, senior ministers, and officials of the church.
Well, glad to have all of you around this table once again. And I just want to give you first a little rundown on some of the things that we have to discuss. We now have received the first worldwide financial statement prepared by Arthur Anderson and Company. They audit some of the largest banks in the United States, some of the greatest industrial corporations, and they audit the books now, the Worldwide Church of God and its affiliated corporations, not only here, but in all of our offices all over the world. Now, incidentally, there's another very exceptional thing about it. This is the golden anniversary year of the church. This era of the church, and I emphasize this era because the church began in 31 AD, and it's the same church. But it has had different eras, and there are certain distinctions and differences between different periods of time, as Jesus made plain in the 2nd and 3rd chapters of the book of Revelation.
Over 1,100 ministers and elders now serve 750 congregations in 62 countries, as God has blessed the Philadelphia era, causing it to grow until it has become truly a worldwide Church of God. As Pastor General of the Worldwide Church, and as a voice crying out in the wilderness of confusion and ignorance, Mr. Armstrong must visit all parts of the world, God has opened the door for him to take the announcement of the coming kingdom of God to leaders and rulers of major nations and to speak directly to the people of many countries.